A secret society once held the keys to modern magic. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn rose from obscurity to illuminate the hidden world of the Victorian era, only to be torn apart from within. By the end of this story, you will understand how a single magical order came to define Western esotericism for a century. We will uncover how a few coded pages spawned a legion of adepts, and why a battle over invisible masters shattered it all. What does it take for a perfect vision of power to ultimately destroy itself? London in the late 19th century was a city of stark contrasts. While steam and industry promised a rational, mechanical future, a deep undercurrent of spiritual longing pulled in the opposite direction. The established churches seemed to offer cold comfort to many, leaving a vacuum filled by a burgeoning fascination with the unseen. This was the age of the seance, where tables tipped and spirits wrapped in darkened parlors across the country. Spiritualism offered direct, tangible proof of an afterlife, capturing the public imagination. Yet for some, this was not enough. It was emotional, often chaotic, and lacked a deeper philosophical structure. Simultaneously, the secret traditions of Freemasonry, with its rituals and symbols, and the mythical Rosicrucian Brotherhood, whispered about in old manuscripts, hinted at a more ordered and ancient wisdom. People were hungry for a system that was not just about contacting the dead, but about transforming the self. They sought a path that combined the rigor of science with the wonder of magic. It was into this perfect storm of disillusionment and curiosity that the Golden Dawn would step, offering exactly what the era craved: a structured, almost academic, approach to the mysteries of existence. Why merely speak to spirits when you could, perhaps, learn to command the very elements of the universe? The catalyst for this new order arrived not as a grand prophecy, but as a bundle of old papers. Tucked away in a London bookstall, a collection of coded manuscripts was discovered. They were written in a complex cipher, a secret script that looked like little more than meaningless symbols to the untrained eye. The man who came into possession of these pages was Dr. William Westcott, a coroner and a dedicated Freemason with a deep interest in the occult. For a man like Westcott, this was not just a curiosity, it was a call to action. He set to work deciphering the pages, and what he uncovered was astonishing. The coded text did not contain a simple secret message or a single spell. Instead, it laid out the entire skeleton of a magical initiation system. It detailed a complete curriculum with graded rituals, symbolic diagrams, and a path of spiritual ascent. This was the blueprint for a school of hidden knowledge. According to the story that would become central to the order's founding myth, the manuscripts also contained an address in Germany. Westcott wrote to this address, making contact with a mysterious adept known as Fraulein Anna Sprengel. She was said to be a high-ranking member of a continental Rosicrucian lodge, a secret master guarding ancient wisdom. Their correspondence, whether real or brilliantly invented, resulted in a momentous grant of authority. Fraulein Sprengel allegedly gave Westcott her full permission to establish an English branch of this hidden brotherhood. This permission, this charter from an unseen and authoritative source, provided the legitimacy the new order desperately needed. It transformed a set of decoded papers into a sacred mandate, the foundation upon which the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn would be built. But how do you turn a blueprint into a living temple? With the charter in hand, Westcott knew he could not build this temple alone. He turned to two fellow Masons whose unique talents would prove essential. The first was Dr. William Robert Woodman, an elderly physician and the supreme magus of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, a Masonic group dedicated to Rosicrucian studies. Woodman was the respected elder, a living library of esoteric knowledge whose name lent the fledgling order an air of established credibility. The second was the man who would become the order's undeniable engine, Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers. Where Westcott was the scholarly organizer and Woodman the venerable authority, Mathers was the brilliant, obsessive visionary. He was a man who lived and breathed magic, utterly devoted to the reconstruction of ancient rites. It was this trio, Westcott, Mathers, and Woodman, who formed the three ruling chiefs of the new order. Their combined expertise was a perfect alchemical mixture. From their shared background in Freemasonry and the SRIA, they understood the power of ritual, the importance of hierarchy, and the language of symbolism. But they envisioned something far more dynamic than their Masonic roots. They wanted a school that was not just about philosophical discussion, but about active spiritual training and practical magical work. This vision materialized in 1888 with the establishment of the Isis Urania Temple, number 3, in London. Why number 3, you might wonder? The numbering was a direct link to the mythical authority of Anna Sprengel, suggesting two prior, secret temples already existed under her guidance. The Isis Urania Temple became the physical and spiritual home for the Order's revolutionary curriculum. It was here that Mather's genius truly flourished. He took the skeleton of the coded manuscripts and began to flesh them out with breathtaking detail. He wrote entire initiation ceremonies, creating a multi-stage journey for the seeker. A new member or neophyte would begin in darkness, and through each successive ritual would be symbolically purified, tested, and reborn into a higher state of awareness. The rituals were not simple readings. They were full-scale dramatic productions involving specific costumes, tools, and symbolic gestures, all designed to alter the participant's consciousness. This was the foundational strength of the Golden Dawn, a structured, step-by-step path that promised real transformation, all built upon the combined strengths of its three very different founders. But what happens when a system designed for perfect order meets the turbulent force of human ambition? The heart of the Golden Dawn beat within its initiation ceremonies, and the very first of these, the 0=0 neophyte grade, was a profound and calculated shock to the system. A candidate would arrive at the temple, often a private home or rented hall that had been transformed for the evening, filled with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. They were led into a room that was purposefully kept in near total darkness, a space representing the unenlightened state of the material world. Here, they were blindfolded, their physical sight taken away to force an inward turn. The ritual was not merely a lecture or a simple oath. It was a full-scale psychological drama designed to dismantle the seeker's ordinary perception and rebuild it on a new foundation. The entire experience was orchestrated to mark a definitive break from everything they considered the profane, everyday world, a point of no return in their spiritual lives. This dramatic journey unfolded in a space known as the Hall of Dual Manifestation. This was not a literal hall, but a highly symbolic ritual chamber representing the entire universe in a state of balanced opposition. At its center stood an altar, upon which rested the four elemental tools, a wand, a cup, a dagger, and a pentacle, signifying the forces of fire, water, air, and earth that the candidate would one day learn to command. The room itself was divided by a great veiled portal, separating the outer darkness from the illuminated inner sanctum. The entire space was a map of cosmic principles, a physical embodiment of the hidden laws the neophyte was now stepping into. Every color, every symbol, every piece of furniture was a deliberate piece of a grand living puzzle. Presiding over this sacred theater was the Hierophant, the chief officer of the temple. He was not just a leader, but a living symbol of divine wisdom and authority. Seated in the east, the place of the rising sun and new beginnings, the Hierophant represented the aspirant's higher self, the goal of the entire magical journey. His role was to guide, challenge, and ultimately welcome the candidate into the light. He would pose solemn questions, demand commitments, and lead the recitation of oaths. His voice was the anchor in the ritual storm, a constant reminder of the wisdom and power that awaited beyond the initial trials. He was the first face of the hidden masters, the human link to that ancient, secret authority. The ritual itself was a sequence of ordeals and revelations. The candidate, blindfolded and symbolically bound by a rope around their waist, was led on a stumbling, uncertain path. They were challenged by other officers representing guardians of the threshold, their progress barred until they gave the correct passwords or signs, which they had memorized beforehand. The climax came as they were brought before the veiled portal. At the Hierophant's command, the veil was drawn aside, and in a single, breathtaking moment, the blindfold was removed. The candidate, who had known only darkness, was suddenly flooded with light, gazing upon the magnificently decorated temple in its full glory, with the Hierophant radiant upon his throne. This was the moment of spiritual rebirth, the first true awakening. It was designed to be an unforgettable psychic imprint, searing the desire for further knowledge and transformation into their very soul. This powerful, orchestrated experience did not teach complex magical formulas. Its purpose was far more fundamental: to purify the aspirant's intention and prepare the ground for all the mysteries that were to come. How could such a perfect system, built on such profound beginnings, ever hope to contain the egos of those who passed through its portal? Once the shock of initiation had settled, a new kind of journey began, one of disciplined study. The Golden Dawn did not leave its newly awakened neophytes to wander in a maze of symbols. It provided a map. This map was delivered through the knowledge lectures, a series of structured lessons that formed the core of the Order's revolutionary educational system. For the first time in the Western esoteric world, a comprehensive magical education was made systematically available to anyone deemed worthy of initiation, completely dismantling the old barriers of gender and exclusive Masonic membership. This was not a secret passed from master to apprentice in hushed tones. It was a written, graded curriculum. The Order provided the keys, and it was up to the individual student to do the work of unlocking the doors. The curriculum began with foundational elements that might seem simple on the surface, but were profound in their implications. Students were first taught the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This was not merely a linguistic exercise. Each letter was presented as a vessel of immense power, a key to deeper cosmic truths. They learned that the letter Aleph represented the element of air and the Fool card in the tarot, while Beth corresponded to Mercury and the Magician. This created an interconnected web of meaning from the very start. Alongside this, they delved into the basics of astrology, learning the meanings of the planets and zodiac signs not as distant celestial bodies, but as living forces that influence the inner world as much as the outer. The tarot was not seen as a simple fortune-telling device, but as a symbolic book of wisdom, its 78 cards corresponding to paths and spheres on another, even more complex, diagram, the Kabbalah. It was the introduction to the Kabbalah, specifically the diagram known as the Tree of Life, that tied everything together. This was the great organizing principle of the entire system. The Tree of Life is a map of consciousness itself, composed of 10 spheres or sephiroth, connected by 22 paths. Each sephira represents a different divine attribute, from the supreme crown of Kether to the material kingdom of Malkuth. The student learned to see their own spiritual journey as an ascent up this tree, from the earthly realm toward the divine. The Hebrew letters, the astrological symbols, and the tarot cards were all assigned to specific paths on this map. A student studying the path from Jabura to Chizd, for instance, would find it corresponded to the Hebrew letter Teth, the sign of Leo, and the strength card in the tarot. This created a resonant system where every symbol reinforced every other, allowing for a deep, intuitive understanding to develop over time. They even learned geomancy, an ancient form of divination using earth and marks, as another practical tool to interpret the will of the cosmos. This structured, written knowledge was nothing short of a democratization of occult power. Before the Golden Dawn, such a complete synthesis of these traditions was scattered across rare, expensive manuscripts, guarded by closed societies, or trapped in obscure oral lineages. Now, a dedicated shopkeeper or a curious writer could receive the same foundational training as a university professor or a Masonic elder. All that was required was commitment, intellectual curiosity, and the willingness to transform oneself. The knowledge lectures empowered the individual seeker, providing them with the tools to build their own understanding from the ground up. This educational generosity created a new kind of magician, one who was not dependent on a guru, but who could, with enough study and practice, ultimately become their own authority. And it was this very empowerment, this seeding of independent magical authority that would later fuel the fires of the Order's own destruction. But the true magic of the Golden Dawn was not just in the knowledge it taught, it was in the rituals it performed, and the architect of those rituals was Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers. He was the engine of the Order, a man possessed by a singular vision to rebuild the lost temples of ancient wisdom. The coded manuscripts provided only a skeleton, a bare outline of grades and symbols. It was Mathers who breathed life into those bones, fleshing them out into a complete, living system of magic that was both intellectually rigorous and profoundly transformative. His genius lay not in invention, but in synthesis. He became a spiritual archaeologist, excavating fragments from a dozen different traditions and fitting them together into a new and coherent whole. From the sands of Egypt, he drew the powerful imagery of Isis and Osiris, gods of magic and resurrection. From the mystical texts of Christianity, he incorporated the divine names and hierarchies of angels. The complex structure of the Kabbalah provided the ultimate map, the scaffolding upon which everything else was hung. And from forgotten Renaissance grimoires, the books of magical instruction, he adapted the practical techniques for conjuring and commanding spiritual forces. Mathers did not see these traditions as separate. He perceived them as different dialects of a single universal language of power. In his hands, an Egyptian god name could be invoked using a Hebrew grammatical structure, while the magician stood within a circle decorated with astrological symbols. This was his great gift, creating a system where all these elements resonated together, amplifying each other to produce a profound effect on the practitioner's consciousness. The result was a multi-grade initiation system that was like a university for the soul. A member did not just learn about magic, they experienced it directly, grade by grade, through rituals that Mathers penned with meticulous detail. Each ceremony was a dramatic journey, a guided meditation in action, designed to imprint specific spiritual truths upon the initiate's subconscious. He wrote the scripts, designed the symbolic tools, and dictated the precise colors and fabrics of the robes. For Mathers, every detail was a key, and every ritual was a lock that, when turned, would open a new chamber within the inner temple of the self. This coherent and potent system, largely the product of one man's obsessive work, became the gold standard for Western ritual magic. Its influence echoes through every occult circle that followed, a testament to the monumental contribution of a man who believed he was not inventing, but rediscovering a lost and sacred science. This structured ascent began at the very bottom of the Tree of Life, in the material world of Malkuth. Here, the newly initiated neophyte stood, having glimpsed the light but still firmly rooted in the kingdom of Earth. The first true step upward was the grade of Zelator, assigned to the sphere of Malkuth itself. This might seem counterintuitive, to be given a grade for the place you already are, but the journey was one of mastery, not just visitation. As a Zelator, the members' task was to fully understand the physical world they inhabited. Their studies focused on the hidden geometry of nature, the secret forces within the earth itself, and the fundamentals of geomancy. They learned to see the divine not as something distant, but as something immanent within the very soil, stones, and structures of the material plane. It was a grounding, a necessary consolidation of their starting point before they could hope to climb any higher. Passing the examination for Zelator led the aspirant to the next sphere, Yesod, and the grade of Theuricus. Yesod is known as the foundation, the realm of the moon and the astral plane, the great subconscious mirror of the universe. This was a profound shift from the solid ground of Malkuth to the fluid, reflective world of Yesod. As a Theuricus, the student delved into the mechanics of the unseen. Their curriculum expanded dramatically into the intricate web of the Kabbalah. They memorized the correspondences of the 32 paths of wisdom, learning how the 10 Sephiroth and the 22 connecting paths formed a single, living organism of divine emanation. They studied the complex symbolism of the tarot in greater depth, seeing each card as a gateway on this map. Furthermore, they were introduced to the art of scrying, the practice of gazing into a dark mirror or a crystal to perceive spiritual visions. This grade was a test of the mind's ability to hold and manipulate vast symbolic structures, to build a stable foundation of theoretical knowledge upon which practical magic could later stand. The next ascent brought the member to the sphere of Hod, the place of intellect, logic, and communication, corresponding to the grade of practicus. If Yesod was the realm of the moon and the subconscious, Hod was the domain of Mercury, the planet of the conscious, analytical mind. Here, the focus turned to the power of the word and the name. The practicus immersed themselves in the study of divine names, the potent words of power from Hebrew and other traditions believed to invoke specific spiritual forces. They learned the intricate rules of practical magic, the construction and consecration of the elemental tools they had first seen on the altar as a neophyte. This was where theory began its deliberate turn into practice. The student learned how to formulate a will, to craft a ritual, and to use the intellectual structures they had mastered to create change in the astral foundation of Yesod, which would in turn reflect back into the material world of Malkuth. It was a grade of immense mental discipline, training the magician to use their intellect as a precise and powerful instrument. The final grade of the outer order was that of Philosophus, attributed to the sphere of Netzach. Netzach stands in perfect balance to Hod, representing emotion, intuition, and the creative force of nature. Where Hod was analytical and structured, Netzach was flowing and inspirational. The Philosophus was tasked with mastering this dynamic, often chaotic, aspect of the self. Their studies involved a deep understanding of the four classical elements, not just as symbols, but as living forces within their own psyche. They learned to balance the fiery passion of their desires with the watery flow of their emotions, the airy clarity of their thoughts, and the earthy stability of their body. This grade served as a crucial preparation for the immense leap that was to come. The entire outer order, from Zelator to Philosophus, was a journey through the four elements and the lower facets of the personality, systematically purifying and empowering the individual. It was a complete education in itself, designed to forge a balanced and capable vessel, ready to be filled with the transcendent energies of the higher, secret grades that awaited beyond a final, formidable portal. What could possibly lie beyond such a comprehensive training, and who would be deemed worthy to cross that ultimate threshold? A final, formidable barrier stood between the outer order and the true inner sanctum, a mysterious transitional stage known simply as the portal. This was not merely another grade, it was a profound ordeal of synthesis. After years of study, having ascended through the elemental spheres of the outer order, a Philosophus would apply for this singular initiation. The portal existed in a liminal space, a bridge between the known world of theory and the uncharted territories of practical power. Its purpose was to shatter the seeker's remaining intellectual constructs and force a direct, visceral encounter with the unity behind all symbols. The ritual was famously intense, a psychological crucible designed to burn away the last vestiges of the mundane self. Candidates were confronted with the combined and often conflicting forces of the elements they had studied in isolation, experiencing them as a chaotic, overwhelming whole. It was a test of equilibrium, demanding that the initiate find their center not through knowledge alone, but through a newfound spiritual poise. Success in the portal meant the candidate had proven they could hold the tension of opposites without breaking, that they were ready to move beyond being a student and become an operator of the mysteries. Passing through the portal granted entry into the true heart of the Golden Dawn, the inner order known as the Rasi Ruby et Ori Crucis, the Red Rose and the Cross of Gold. This was the domain of the adepts. The atmosphere here was entirely different. The outer order's structured lectures were replaced by direct magical operation and alchemical transformation. Where the outer temple was a school, the inner temple was a laboratory for the soul. The symbolism of the rose and cross itself spoke to the ultimate goal, the uniting of the red rose of desire and passion with the golden cross of sacrifice and the higher will, a perfect reconciliation of the human and the divine. Membership was fiercely exclusive, limited to those who had not only mastered the curriculum, but had also demonstrated the moral and spiritual maturity to wield its practical applications. Here, the theoretical maps of the Kabbalah were no longer just for study. They became blueprints for travel. Within the secret vault of the inner order, the adepts' work became intensely personal and potent. They learned and practiced the supreme art of the Golden Dawn, the ritual of the pentagram and its more advanced counterpart, the ritual of the hexagram. These were not simple gestures, they were precise technologies of consciousness. Using a consecrated dagger, the magician would trace specific pentagrams in the air at the 4 cardinal points, each one designed to invoke or banish the elemental forces of a region. This act was meant to purify a space, to create a fortified temple in the astral plane, a bubble of controlled reality where the normal laws of the mundane world could be suspended. The hexagram ritual worked with planetary forces, drawing down the influence of Saturn, Jupiter, or Venus to effect more profound and sweeping changes. This was the core of practical magic, the deliberate reshaping of the unseen substance of the universe to align with one's true will. Beyond these foundational rituals lay the ultimate magical work, the invocation of what were known as the higher genius and the holy guardian angel. This was not about summoning an external spirit for favors, it was the supreme alchemical operation of the self. The adept would use complex ceremonies, scrying, and intense meditation to forge a conscious link with their own divine source, their higher, eternal self. This process, known as the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, was considered the single most important goal of the entire magical path. It represented a complete rebirth of the individual, where the lower personality became a perfect vessel for the higher will to express itself in the world. Every symbol, every ritual, every hour of study in the outer order was a preparation for this one sublime achievement, the ultimate discovery of the divine spark within. Yet this very pursuit of supreme individual enlightenment, happening in a secret circle of powerful and ambitious people, created a pressure cooker of mystical ambition. How could such a potent and personal quest for power fail to ignite rivalries, especially when the man who built the entire system began to believe he was no longer just its architect, but its divine mouthpiece? The halls of the Isis Urania temple were not filled with anonymous seekers, but with some of the most brilliant and creatively explosive minds of the era. The order's reputation was not just built on its rituals, but on the luminaries it attracted. Among its most devoted members was the poet William Butler Yeats. For Yeats, the Golden Dawn was not a hobby, it was the central spiritual workshop of his life. The order's symbols and its quest for a unified spiritual reality saturated his poetry, transforming his work from beautiful verse into layered mystical incantations. The rose, the tower, the gyre, all core images in his later poems, were not mere metaphors. They were precise terms from his magical studies, gateways to a deeper understanding of the world's hidden architecture. He saw magic as the most important pursuit of his intellect, a serious discipline to reunite a fractured modern consciousness with the ancient truths of the soul. His steadfast dedication provided the order with a pillar of intellectual and artistic credibility. Then there was Florence Farr, a celebrated actress and a fierce advocate for women's rights. In a time when most esoteric societies were exclusively male, the Golden Dawn's equal admission policy allowed a woman of Farr's formidable intellect to rise to the highest ranks. She became the premonstratrix, or chief lecturer of the London Temple, a position of immense authority and responsibility. She was not a passive member, she was a dynamic force, deeply involved in the order's most advanced magical research and a key figure in its administrative life. Her presence demonstrated that the order was a genuine meritocracy of the spirit, where talent and dedication, not gender, determined one's progress. Another member, the writer Arthur Machen, channeled the order's atmosphere of ancient, lurking mystery into his seminal works of weird fiction. His famous story, The Great God Pan, pulses with the same sense of terrifying wonder that a neophyte might feel upon first entering the hall of dual manifestation. The idea that our world is a thin veil hiding immense, and often dangerous, cosmic forces was not just a literary theme for Machen. It was a foundational principle of his magical training. His stories can be read as fictionalized accounts of magical operations gone awry, where the searcher for truth glimpses something behind the veil that the human mind was never meant to comprehend. But no member would come to define the Order's legacy and its ultimate downfall more than the brilliant and incendiary Aleister Crowley. He joined the Golden Dawn with a voracious appetite for power and a colossal ego that the system was designed to dismantle. Crowley saw the rituals not as a path to spiritual humility, but as a technology for asserting his own will as a divine authority. He progressed through the grades with astonishing speed, his sharp intellect easily mastering the knowledge lectures, but his rebellious nature and flamboyant personal life clashed violently with the Order's Victorian sensibilities. He was a force of chaos who believed the rules were for others, and his very presence exposed a critical weakness in the Order's structure. What happens when a system built to transform the individual encounters a person who believes he is already a master and refuses to be transformed? The influence flowed both ways. While the Order shaped these individuals, their fame and their public works, from Yeats's poetry to Machen's horror stories, poured back into the Order, elevating it from a secret society into a cultural phenomenon. It became known as the place where the artistic and intellectual avant-garde went to discover the roots of their own inspiration. This collection of genius, however, created a volatile chemistry. Placing such powerful and independent personalities within a rigid hierarchy, all pursuing the ultimate prize of personal spiritual power, was like assembling a reactor with too much fissile material. It was only a matter of time before the core went critical. A quiet rebellion was simmering in the London Temple. For years, the adepts had accepted Mathers as their undisputed chief, the brilliant architect of their magical world. But from his self-imposed exile in Paris, his rule began to feel less like enlightened guidance and more like a distant tyranny. The first cracks appeared over money. Mathers, who had moved to France to be closer to the spiritual currents he believed fueled his work, made constant financial demands on the Order. He was living in poverty, wholly dedicated to his magical research, and he expected the comparatively comfortable London members to fund his lifestyle and his esoteric projects. These repeated requests for funds, framed not as requests but as dues owed to the secret chiefs themselves, began to grate on the adepts. They saw a man asking for their money while offering little in return but increasingly strange and dogmatic pronouncements. The practical magicians in London, people like Florence Farr who were managing the day-to-day operations, started to question what they were really paying for. Was it to support a genuine spiritual leader, or was it to subsidize the delusions of a man losing his grip on reality? This financial friction was merely a symptom of a much deeper divide. Mathers' correspondence became dominated by his communications with the secret chiefs, the invisible masters who had authorized the Order. He claimed they were no longer just a historical fact, but active, speaking intelligences who dictated new rituals and policies directly through him. He presented their decrees as absolute, unchangeable law, demanding total obedience. For the London adepts, this was a fundamental betrayal of the Order's own principles. They had been taught that the ultimate goal was the knowledge and conversation of one's own holy guardian angel, to become a sovereign spiritual individual. Now, their chief was demanding they surrender that hard-won sovereignty to him, as the sole mouthpiece for unseen entities only he could contact. The very idea of a magical autocracy, of a pope of the occult, went against everything the Golden Dawn was supposed to stand for. It felt less like a mystery school and more like a cult of personality centered on a man they rarely saw. The tension built until a single, shocking letter arrived from Paris. In it, Mathers made an announcement that would ignite the conflict. He declared that the founding charter, the very document from Anna Sprengel that had given the Order its legitimacy, was a forgery. He stated that he, Samuel Little MacGregor Mathers, had fabricated the entire correspondence with the German adept years earlier. He admitted this not as a confession of fraud, but as a demonstration of his own supreme authority. He argued that the real secret chiefs, seeing his unparalleled magical genius, had guided him to create the necessary myth to found the Order. Therefore, he concluded, The order's legitimacy did not stem from a piece of paper, but from his own continued connection to these masters. In his mind, this cemented his absolute power. In the minds of the London adepts, it shattered the foundation of their entire world. If the charter was a lie, what else was not true? And if their leader was a confessed forger, could he still be trusted with their spiritual lives? The stage was now set for a war over the soul of magic itself. The fragile authority of Mathers was about to be shattered by a pair of masterful deceivers. Into this volatile mix stepped a couple who called themselves Mr. and Mrs. Horrocks, though their real names were Frank and Edith Jackson. They were professional swindlers, predators who traveled the world exploiting the spiritual yearnings of others. When they arrived in Paris, they targeted Mathers with a story perfectly crafted to appeal to his greatest weakness. They presented themselves as the very secret chiefs he claimed to communicate with, or at least as their direct, earthly emissaries. They spun a tale of being powerful adepts from the East, possessing ancient wisdom that dwarfed even his own, to a man isolated and desperate for validation of his own authority. This was an intoxicating bait. Mathers, in a stunning lapse of judgment, welcomed them as honored guests and initiates. In a moment of catastrophic carelessness, he even allowed them access to the Order's most sacred texts, including the secret script for the powerful neophyte initiation ritual. The Horrocks couple, seeing the golden opportunity, promptly stole the manuscript and vanished. They had obtained the keys to the kingdom, and they intended to use them not for enlightenment, but for profit and predation. They traveled to London and established their own fraudulent temple, a grim parody of the Golden Dawn. Using the stolen neophyte ritual, they began initiating gullible seekers. Their operation was a cruel farce, designed to extract money and, far more horrifically, to gratify the darkest desires of the male partner. The rituals, once a sacred drama of spiritual rebirth, were twisted into a pretext for sexual assault. The entire scheme collapsed when a young woman, having undergone this traumatic mockery of an initiation, had the courage to go to the police. The subsequent trial in 1901 was a media sensation. The details that spilled into the public newspapers were devastating. The secret signs, the symbolic gestures, the very words of the neophyte oath, all were read aloud in a crowded courtroom. The name of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was splashed across the front pages, not as a school of high magic, but as the backdrop to a sordid story of fraud and rape. For a society built upon the absolute sanctity of its secrecy, this public exposure was a fatal wound. The outer veil had been ripped away, and the mysteries were reduced to tabloid fodder. The trial ended with the conviction of both Horrocks and Jackson, but the damage to the Order's reputation was irreversible. The scandal proved that its secrets were not safe, its leaders were fallible, and its lofty spiritual ideals could be perverted into the most base criminality. In the eyes of the public, and for many of its own members, the Golden Dawn was now forever tainted. The Horrocks scandal had ripped away the Order's veil of secrecy, leaving its leadership exposed and vulnerable. With public disgrace looming, the simmering discontent in London finally boiled over into open rebellion. Florence Farr, the formidable premonstratrix, had long grown weary of Mathers' absentee rule and his increasingly erratic demands. She convened a committee of senior adepts and presented them with an ultimatum. Mathers must either return to London to govern transparently or be deposed. They drafted a letter demanding his resignation as chief. It was a direct challenge to his divine authority, an act he could only see as utter treason. From his Paris apartment, Mathers received their missive with cold fury. He immediately issued a counter-proclamation, expelling Florence Farr and her entire rebellion from the order he claimed to have created. The schism was now official, a magical war declared across the English Channel. The immediate prize in this conflict was not just loyalty, but a physical space, the temple headquarters at 36 Blythe Road. This was the sacred ground where the vault of the adepts, the heart of the inner order, was housed. Whoever controlled the vault controlled the order's spiritual lineage, or so they believed. Mathers, stranded in Paris, needed a physical agent, a loyal enforcer to reclaim his property. He chose the most volatile and ambitious weapon in his arsenal, the recently initiated but fiercely devoted Aleister Crowley. He appointed Crowley as his special envoy, granting him the authority to take possession of the Blythe Road premises by any means necessary. For Crowley, this was a sacred mission and a chance for glory, a test of his magical will against the old guard he despised. He relished the role of Mather's magical shock trooper. The confrontation that followed was less a mystical duel and more a farcical siege. Crowley, dressed in full Highland regalia complete with a blackened face and a dramatic false beard, arrived at Blythe Road with a hired companion. He believed the theatrical disguise would imbue him with the authority of a Celtic chieftain, a living symbol of Mather's will. He demanded entry to the temple, brandishing the documents that named him as the rightful representative of the chief. Waiting for him inside was the order's appointed guardian, a sturdy and unimpressed adept named William Butler Yeats. The poet, who had once seen Crowley as a promising but troubled student, now saw him as a dangerous puppet. Yeats, along with a few other members, physically barred the doorway. What ensued was a pathetic scuffle, a tussle of pushing and shouting on the doorstep of a building dedicated to cosmic harmony. Crowley, his disguise doing little to enhance his physical prowess, was ultimately thwarted and forced to retreat. The police were called, not to settle a dispute over invisible masters, but to resolve a simple case of attempted breaking and entering. The battle for Blythe Road was over. Crowley had failed in his mission, and the London faction had successfully defended their temple. But in a deeper sense, everyone had lost. The sacred mysteries had been reduced to a petty squabble over real estate, fought with costumes and brawls instead of pentagrams and invocations. The event proved that no magical authority could survive when trust had completely evaporated. The physical confrontation made the spiritual rupture final and undeniable, shattering the Golden Dawn into irreparable fragments. Out of the wreckage of the London Rebellion, a new star began to rise. While the original order lay shattered by scandal and infighting, not all of its members were willing to let the light go out. One group, led by the dedicated Dr. Robert Felkin, believed the core teachings were too valuable to abandon. They saw the collapse not as an end, but as an opportunity for purification and renewal. From this conviction, they formed a new order, the Stella Matutina, the Morning Star. This name itself was a powerful declaration of intent, symbolizing the first light of dawn after a long night, a promise that the wisdom of the Golden Dawn could still guide seekers toward a new day. The Stella Matutina was not a simple copy, it was a reformation. Its founders were determined to learn from the mistakes that had torn the parent order apart. They implemented stricter governance to prevent any single individual from amassing the autocratic power Mathers had claimed. The emphasis shifted, too, becoming more explicitly aligned with Christian mysticism. The rituals and Kabbalistic studies remained, but they were now framed within a context that emphasized the cosmic Christ and the angelic hierarchies, making the system more accessible and less alarming to a British audience steeped in a Christian cultural background. This Christian mystical emphasis did not dilute the magic. Rather, it provided a new lens through which to view the ancient mysteries. The pursuit of the holy guardian angel, for instance, could now be understood as seeking a direct connection with the personal Christ within, a deeply personal and transformative spiritual goal. The Stella Matutina worked diligently to establish its own temples, creating new centers for this refined tradition. One of its most significant ventures was the Hermes Temple in Bristol, which would become a crucible for the next generation of esoteric thinkers. It was here that a young and fiercely intelligent woman named Violet Firth, who would later become famous under her magical name, Dion Fortune, first encountered the mysteries. Fortune joined the Stella Matutina and rapidly advanced through its grades, her powerful psychic abilities and sharp intellect marking her as a standout adept. Her experiences within the order, both positive and negative, would become the bedrock of her own life's work. She absorbed the Stella Matutina's synthesized system of Kabbalah, ritual magic, and Christian mysticism, but she also began to question and expand upon it. Eventually, she would leave to found her own society, the Society of the Inner Light, channeling the core principles she had learned into a new, dynamic form of esoteric psychology and training. Through Dion Fortune, the lineage of the Stella Matutina, and thus a reformed strand of the original Golden Dawn, flowed outward into the wider world, influencing countless seekers in the decades to follow. The phoenix had indeed risen, but its flight was far from over. What other paths would emerge from the ashes, and how would the original vision mutate in the hands of its most notorious rebel? While the Stella Matutina offered a reformed path, the original architect was not finished. Samuel Mathers refused to let his life's work be dismantled by what he saw as a cabal of ungrateful rebels. From his base in Paris, he and his wife, Moina, declared their own temple as the one true and legitimate successor to the Golden Dawn. They named it the Alpha et Omega, the Alpha and Omega, a name proclaiming it was both the beginning and the end, the first and final word on the mysteries. This was Mather's defiant statement, his claim to possess the complete, unbroken lineage from the secret chiefs. The AO was not a new order, it was the old order, purified of dissent and preserved exactly as he had intended. Its membership was intentionally small, composed of a tight-knit circle of loyalists who accepted Mather's absolute authority without question. Here, there would be no committees, no debates, and no challenges from headstrong adepts. It was a magical monarchy, with Mathers as its king and high priest. In this controlled environment, he and Moina could protect the rituals in their original, potent form, ensuring that not a single syllable or symbolic gesture was altered by compromise. Moina Mathers became the spiritual backbone of this endeavor. As a gifted clairvoyant and artist, she was far more than just the chief's wife. She was his equal partner in magic. It was Moina who often translated the visions received during their invocations, painting the detailed images of the god forms and spiritual beings that populated their rites. Her intuitive gifts provided a living link to the very forces Mathers sought to codify. While he was the scholar and architect, she was the seer and the mystic heart. Together, they formed a complete magical unit, and the AO was the manifestation of their shared, uncompromising vision. They saw themselves as the custodians of a sacred flame, guarding it against the corruption of the modern world and the treachery of former friends. The teachings within the Alpha et Omega remain pristine, a perfect time capsule of the original system. Mathers insisted on the absolute fidelity of his rituals, considering any deviation to be a form of spiritual sabotage. For the few initiates who passed through its doors, the experience was one of intense, undiluted tradition. They learned the same knowledge lectures, underwent the same powerful initiations, and practiced the same advanced magic as the first members of the Isis Urania Temple. This rigid preservation became the AO's greatest strength and its ultimate limitation. By refusing to evolve or adapt, it ensured the survival of Mather's pure vision for decades, but it also fossilized it. The order became a living museum of esoteric thought, magnificent in its authenticity, but increasingly isolated from the changing currents of the 20th century. Through small, dedicated offshoots, the AO lineage did manage to seed itself for the future. One of its most significant branches was established in New Zealand by a stout traditionalist named Charles Stansfeld Jones. This transcontinental connection proved that the original current could be transplanted and could thrive far from its European origins, waiting patiently for a new generation to discover its untarnished doctrines. The Alpha et Omega represented a path of orthodox purity, a direct thread back to the source, but it was a path that demanded total surrender to the will of a single, uncompromising man. This left a crucial question hanging in the air, one that would define the next century of occultism. What would become of the rebellious, independent spirit that had shattered the original order? Where would the seekers who craved personal authority, not received dogma, find their home? Yet for William Butler Yeats, the order was never a mere source of poetic imagery. It was the very loom upon which the fabric of his reality was woven. The symbols he encountered in the knowledge lectures and rituals were not decorative. They were living keys to a universal language. His deep engagement with the Kabbalah, particularly the Tree of Life, gave him a metaphysical map to chart the turbulent currents of history and the human soul. This is not a vague influence. You can trace it directly in the architecture of his most famous and terrifying poem, The Second Coming. The poem's opening lines depict a world spiraling into chaos, where the falcon cannot hear the falconer. This is not just a pretty metaphor for social breakdown. For Yeats the Adept, this is a precise description of a cosmic condition. His magical system taught that the universe moves in great cycles of 2,000 years, each ruled by a different zodiacal sign. He believed he was living at the end of the Piscean Age, the age of Christianity, and the violent, chaotic birth of the next Aquarian Age. The poem's title, The Second Coming, is therefore deeply ironic. It is not the return of Christ he foresees, but the arrival of a new, rough beast slouching toward Bethlehem to be born. This monstrous figure is the antithesis of the Christian Savior, the anticipated God form of the incoming eon, whose nature is unknown and terrifying. The entire poem is a magical diagnosis, a scrying of the world's spiritual state through the lens of the Golden Dawn's historical cycles. This was not mere speculation for Yeats. It was the result of a lifetime of systematic magical training and personal vision. His monumental work, A Vision, stands as the ultimate testament to this fusion. This dense, complex book, which he claimed was dictated to him by spiritual communicators through his wife's automatic writing, is essentially a full-blown magical system in its own right. At its heart is the symbol of the interpenetrating gyres, two conical spirals that spin in opposite directions, one expanding as the other contracts. This is a direct echo of the Kabbalistic and Hermetic principle of duality and balance he mastered in the order, the same principle embodied in the Hall of Dual Manifestation. He used this geometric model to explain everything from an individual's personality to the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Every person, every historical epoch, could be plotted on these spinning cones, caught between the opposing tugs of objectivity and subjectivity, primary and antithetical impulses. What was art for other writers was, for Yeats, a form of active magic, a way to perceive and interact with the fundamental structures of existence. The four elements, so central to the outer order grades, also became the building blocks of his poetic world. He did not just use them as passing references, he built entire mythologies upon their balanced interplay. In his play, The Only Jealousy of Amur, the protagonist Cuchulainn is caught between four women who each represent one of the elemental forces, a dramatic enactment of the soul's struggle to reconcile its own composite nature. The fire of his passion, the water of his emotion, the air of his intellect, and the earth of his physical body are all personified, battling for control of his destiny. This is the work of a magician playwright, someone who understood that the elements are not just external substances, but powerful internal realities that must be mastered for any kind of wholeness to be achieved. Yeats did not borrow from the Golden Dawn, he thought through it. Its symbols provided him with a coherent language to articulate visions that would otherwise have remained inchoate and formless. The order gave his profound artistic intuition a skeleton, a structural integrity that allowed his poetry to reach beyond beautiful words into the realm of prophetic utterance. He demonstrated that the ultimate goal of the magical path was not escape from the world, but a deeper, more terrifying, and more beautiful engagement with it. And as his poetic voice grew in authority, another, far more rebellious member was preparing to take the tools of the order and forge a new magical path altogether, one that would invert its very foundations. Aleister Crowley never saw the Golden Dawn as a school, but as a cage. His explosive entry and rapid rise through its grades were acts of conquest, not devotion. He devoured the knowledge lectures with a photographic memory, mastering the complex correspondences of the Kabbalah and Tarot with an ease that both impressed and alarmed his superiors. But Crowley's aim was never to be a good student, it was to become a master in his own right. His flamboyant lifestyle and open defiance of the order's strict Victorian morality put him on a direct collision course with its established leaders, especially the poet William Butler Yeats. To Yeats, Crowley represented everything the order was meant to discipline: the untamed, egotistical will that magic sought to purify and align with the divine. Their clashes were inevitable, a fundamental conflict between tradition and rebellion, between the polished symbol and the raw, chaotic force. This tension culminated in Crowley's abrupt expulsion, an act that did not humble him, but instead confirmed his belief that all established authority was there to be overthrown. Cast out from the temple, he took its most powerful tools with him. The entire structured curriculum of the Golden Dawn, from the rituals of the pentagram to the map of the Tree of Life, became the foundation upon which he would build his own empire of the will. He did not discard the system, he inverted it. The ultimate goal was no longer the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel as a separate, higher self, but the explicit declaration that every man and every woman is a star, a sovereign center of the universe whose only law is their own true will. This core principle, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," became the bedrock of his new religion, the Lemma. To spread this law, Crowley created his own magical orders. The Astar, or Astrum Argentinum, was designed as a direct successor and rival to the Golden Dawn, but with a crucial difference: it was structured to be utterly meritocratic and devoid of the personality, politics he believed had corrupted the original. He preserved the graded initiation system and the core teachings, but he stripped away the Christian mystical overlay, reframing everything through the lens of the Lemmic cosmology. Meanwhile, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, which he later came to lead, integrated these magical practices with a new element: the use of sacred sexuality as a means of achieving spiritual ecstasy and wielding magical power. In the OTO, the rituals of the Golden Dawn were woven into a larger tapestry that included esoteric Masonic degrees and the practice of sex magic, transforming the symbolic unions of the Kabbalah into tangible, physical operations. The invocation of the higher genius became the invocation of one's own divine will, enacted not just in a temple, but in the very fabric of life itself. Crowley had taken the golden key of the Golden Dawn and used it to pick the lock on a much larger, and far more dangerous, door. That structured curriculum, born from coded manuscripts and forged in secret temples, refused to die with the order itself. The knowledge lectures did not merely survive, they escaped their original container and became the very bedrock of 20th century Western magic. The Golden Dawn's true, lasting revolution was not in its rituals alone, but in its brilliant synthesis of three ancient disciplines, tarot, astrology, and Kabbalah, into a single, teachable language. Before this synthesis, these were often seen as separate paths: a fortune teller's cards, an astronomer's charts, a mystic's tree. The order's genius was to braid them together into one unbreakable cord of meaning. They mapped the 22 trumps of the tarot directly onto the 22 connecting paths of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. They then assigned the planets and zodiac signs to the trees, 10 spheres and 22 paths. Suddenly, a single symbol like the Tarot's Emperor card was not just an image, it was a complex idea. It was the path connecting the spheres of Tifareth and Chizd, linked to the zodiac sign Aries and the Hebrew letter He, representing a specific type of creative, structuring power in the universe. This created a resonant system where studying one subject automatically illuminated the others, a self-reinforcing web of spiritual insight. This model proved so effective, so logically elegant, that it was simply adopted. Nearly every significant magical group that emerged in the decades that followed, from Dion Fortune's Society of the Inner Light to more modern traditions, built its teaching framework upon this same tripartite foundation. When a contemporary magician today speaks of invoking the energy of Jabura, they are using a Golden Dawn term, understanding it through the Tarot's Tower card and the planet Mars, a direct inheritance from those early lectures. This shared vocabulary allows for a common understanding across different traditions, creating a universal grammar for the unseen world. The curriculum designed to train adepts in a London temple ultimately became the default operating system for modern occultism, its influence so pervasive that many practitioners use its maps without even knowing the original cartographer. How many people who shuffle a tarot deck today realize they are holding a fragment of a grander design, one that was once a fiercely guarded secret? At the heart of the inner order lay its most sacred space, the Vault of the Adepts. This was no ordinary chamber, but a seven-sided room built to precise symbolic dimensions, each wall painted in vibrant colors representing the 7 ancient planets. To step inside was to enter a living, breathing diagram of the cosmos itself. The ceiling arched above, painted with zodiacal symbols, while the floor displayed a complex mosaic of alchemical and Rosicrucian emblems. The air was thick with the scent of incense, each fragrance chosen to correspond with a specific planetary force. This vault was not merely a place for meditation, it was a powerful spiritual battery, a resonator designed to amplify the magical operations of the adepts who worked within its walls. Its construction was considered a supreme magical act in itself, a physical manifestation of the harmonious laws they sought to command. Within this consecrated space, the adepts performed their most potent work, moving beyond personal transformation to active cooperation with cosmic intelligences. They engaged in the elaborate art of evoking planetary spirits. This was not about summoning demons from some dark abyss, but about ritually inviting the conscious energies of the cosmos into a controlled environment. An adept seeking the expansive wisdom of Jupiter, for example, would prepare for days. They would fast, meditate, and create a complex circular diagram on the floor, known as a magic circle, inscribed with divine names and Jupiterian symbols. Dressed in robes of royal blue and violet, carrying a scepter and a censer burning cedarwood incense, they would begin a lengthy ceremony, using specific words of power from Hebrew and Enochian, the angelic language. They would call upon the spirit of Jupiter, visualizing its force gathering in the triangle drawn outside the circle. The goal was not servitude but communication, to learn from these vast intelligences and to draw their benevolent influences into the world. Alongside these grand evocations, adepts mastered the craft of creating and consecrating talismans. A talisman was a physical object, usually a disc of metal or parchment, inscribed with symbolic sigils and names, designed to attract and hold a specific type of energy. An adept wanting to bolster their intellectual clarity might craft a talisman of Mercury. They would begin at an astrologically elected time, when the planet Mercury was strong in the heavens. On a square of pure silver or yellow parchment, they would carefully draw the sigil of Mercury, the symbol of the planet's intelligence, and surround it with the appropriate Hebrew divine names. Then, within their circle, they would hold the talisman aloft, calling upon the forces of Mercury to pour their essence into the object, to bless it and make it a living repository of mercurial power. Once consecrated, this talisman was not a passive charm. It was a focus tool, a constant subtle reminder and attractor of the very qualities the adept sought to cultivate. But perhaps the most personal and transformative practice was that of scrying and traveling in the spirit vision. Scrying involved entering a light trance and gazing into a receptive surface, such as a dark showstone, a pool of ink, or even a crystal ball. The goal was to still the conscious mind and allow the inner senses to perceive images and scenes from the astral plane. An adept might use this to explore the symbolic landscapes of the Kabbalah, journeying along the paths of the Tree of Life to gain direct insight into the nature of, say, the sphere of Jabura, the place of severity and strength. This was not mere daydreaming, it was a disciplined form of spiritual travel. The adept would first perform the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram to purify their space, then vibrate the names of God and the archangels associated with the path they wished to travel. Closing their eyes, they would visualize the symbolic doorway opening before them and then step through in their spirit body, recording every detail of their journey upon their return. This comprehensive approach, from the cosmic architecture of the vault to the intimate focus of the talisman and the inner journeys of the spirit, revealed the Golden Dawn as a complete workshop for reality. It offered its members not just a philosophy to believe, but a set of precise tools to interact with the very fabric of existence. By 1903, the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a phantom, its unified body shattered beyond repair. The Horus scandal had inflicted a wound from which its public reputation could never recover, but the internal rot went far deeper. That single, sordid trial had exposed the Order's most sacred secrets to the world, transforming its mysteries into courtroom evidence and newspaper headlines. For many members, the sacred trust was broken. How could they swear oaths of secrecy over rituals that were now public knowledge? The spiritual currency of the Order had been catastrophically devalued. This public disgrace, however, was merely the final push that sent a structure already cracking under its own weight tumbling into the abyss. The true collapse was fueled by a toxic combination of betrayed trust and clashing wills. The bitter power struggle with Samuel Mathers had proven there was no central authority left to respect. His admission of forging the founding charter and his subsequent expulsion of the London adepts revealed a leader who prioritized his own absolute control over the collective spiritual health of the Order. In response, the rebellion led by Florence Farr and others demonstrated that the members would no longer bow to a distant, autocratic chief, especially one they now viewed as a confessed liar. The magical monarchy Mathers envisioned was met with a defiant meritocracy of senior adepts who believed they had earned the right to govern themselves. This was not just a simple argument over leadership, it was a fundamental schism over the very soul of the organization. Was it a top-down dictatorship guided by one man's contact with invisible masters? Or was it a collaborative fellowship of equals, each pursuing their own knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel? These philosophical differences were irreconcilable. You cannot build a stable temple upon such contradictory foundations. The shared vision that had once united Westcott, Woodman, and Mathers was now completely fragmented. The original temple structure, with its single hierarchy and unified curriculum, became an impossibility. There was no common ground left, no central Isis Urania temple that could house such divergent beliefs and such profound personal animosities. The Golden Dawn did not formally vote to dissolve, it simply fractured, its energy scattering into the half-dozen splinter groups that now claimed its legacy. The original vessel was broken, but the powerful current it had carried now flowed in many new directions, each promising to preserve a different piece of the shattered whole. Behind every great magician, there often stands a great seer. While Samuel Mathers was the public architect of the Golden Dawn, his wife Moina was its secret visionary. She was born Mina Bergson, sister to the famous philosopher Henry Bergson, and from a young age she possessed profound clairvoyant abilities. When she met Samuel, she found a man who did not dismiss her visions but saw them as essential data for their shared magical work. She changed her name to Moina, and together they formed a complete magical unit, a partnership where his scholarly rigor met her intuitive sight. Her contributions were not secondary, they were foundational to the very texture of the Order's rituals. While Samuel deciphered the ancient texts, Moina gazed into the unseen and painted what she found. She was the Order's primary artist, designing the intricate layman badges, the symbolic banners, and the specific color schemes for the ritual robes. These were not arbitrary artistic choices. Every hue and symbol was channeled directly from her visions of the spiritual beings and God forms the rituals were meant to invoke. When an adept wore a robe of a specific shade of blue during a Jupiter ritual, they were wearing a color Moina had perceived in the astral light surrounding that planetary intelligence itself. Her clairvoyance provided the living proof that the symbols in the manuscripts were not dead letters, but gateways to conscious, perceivable forces. Her role extended far beyond art. During the most complex magical operations, it was Moina who would stand as the seer, her consciousness traveling into the realms the rituals were opening. While Samuel and other adepts vibrated the names of power and traced the symbols in the air, Moina would describe the entities that appeared, their forms, their moods, and the messages they conveyed. She was the navigator in unseen waters, confirming that the ceremonies were actually working and providing real-time feedback from the other side. This made her indispensable. The human link that verified the entire system was not just theoretical. After Samuel's death, Moina's role evolved once more, from muse and seer to soul guardian. She took up the mantle of leading the Alpha et Omega, fiercely protecting her husband's work from what she saw as dilution and distortion by other offshoots. She became a living library of the original current, initiating new members with the same uncompromising standards, ensuring that the pure, undiluted vision she and Samuel had forged would not be lost to history. In many ways, Moina Mathers was the true constant, the high priestess who tended the sacred flame from its first spark, through its brightest burn, and into its final, carefully guarded embers. The very concept of the secret chiefs was the cornerstone upon which the Golden Dawn's authority was built, yet it became the fault line that shattered the order. These were not merely historical figures or respected teachers. They were purported to be superhuman adepts, beings of immense power and wisdom who had transcended the physical plane. They were said to reside in a hidden college, guiding the spiritual evolution of humanity from behind the scenes. Samuel Mathers claimed to be their sole, chosen mouthpiece, the only member of the order in direct communication with these invisible masters. This was not a casual claim. It was the source of his ultimate power, the divine mandate that justified his every decree. For years, the members accepted this. The system worked, the rituals were potent, and the knowledge was profound, so why question the source? But as Mathers grew more isolated and his demands more absolute, that faith began to curdle into suspicion. How could they verify his conversations? What if the secret chiefs were not guiding him, but his own unchecked ego was speaking in their name? The theories surrounding this central mystery split into two irreconcilable camps. One held that Mathers was a genuine mystic, a man whose magical attainments had legitimately opened a channel to these higher intelligences. His fanatical dedication, his encyclopedic knowledge, and the sheer coherence of the system he built could be seen as evidence of a real connection. His supporters believed his increasingly strange behavior and dictatorial pronouncements were not signs of madness, but the difficult burden of transmitting laws from a reality beyond ordinary human comprehension. He was a prophet, and like all prophets, he was misunderstood and persecuted by those with lesser vision. The opposing theory was far more cynical, viewing the secret chiefs as a brilliant and necessary deception. From this perspective, the original contact with Anna Sprengel was a complete fabrication, a noble lie concocted by Westcott and Mathers to provide the fledgling order with the instant legitimacy and ancient lineage that every secret society craved. The coded manuscripts were real, but the German adept was pure fiction, a character invented to give the papers a magical pedigree. When Mathers later confessed to the forgery, he was, in a twisted way, claiming authorship of the myth. He was saying that he himself was so advanced that the real secret chiefs had guided him to create the necessary fiction to get the order started. This argument, however, felt like a trap, a circular logic designed to make any challenge to his authority seem like a challenge to the gods themselves. The controversy boiled down to a single, corrosive question: was Mathers a divinely inspired leader or a skilled conman protecting his turf? This was not an academic debate. It was a battle for the soul of the order. The London adepts, like Florence Farr and William Butler Yeats, had been trained to become their own spiritual authorities, to seek their own holy guardian angel. The entire system was designed for individual empowerment. Mathers' demand for total obedience to his unseen contacts was a direct violation of this core principle. It transformed the Golden Dawn from a school of equals into a cult of personality, where the only valid spiritual experience was the one filtered through their chief. The rebellion was, therefore, an inevitable act of magical integrity. The members were not rejecting the idea of higher powers, they were rejecting the idea that one man had a monopoly on them. The schism proved that you cannot build a lasting fellowship on a foundation of uncontestable secrecy. A mystery that cannot be questioned eventually becomes a cage, and every cage, no matter how gilded, will one day be broken open from the inside. The rituals of the Golden Dawn did not vanish with its temples. they simply found new soil in which to grow. One of the most surprising and fertile fields was the burgeoning modern witchcraft movement, where the order's ceremonial structure would be reborn in a more earthy, nature-based form. The connection flows through key figures who acted as living bridges between the world of high ceremonial magic and the revival of the old religion. Dion Fortune, who had been a member of the Stella Matutina, was one such crucial link. Her experiences with the Golden Dawn's inner teachings deeply informed her own writings and her founding of the Society of the Inner Light. She translated complex Kabbalistic concepts into a more accessible, psychological language, emphasizing the power of the subconscious mind and the dynamics of psychic energy. This filtered directly into the early witchcraft scene, as her books became essential reading for seekers looking for a structured yet intuitive magical path. Her work demonstrated that the tree of life and elemental forces were not just for temple adepts, but could be woven into the very fabric of a personal, devotional practice. The most direct lineage, however, runs to Gerald Gardner, the public face of modern Wicca. Gardner was deeply embedded in the British occult scene and maintained extensive correspondence with former Golden Dawn members. When he set out to systematize and present Wicca to the world, he drew heavily upon the ritual technology he had encountered. Look at a traditional Wiccan circle casting, and you are witnessing a simplified, naturalized version of the Golden Dawn's lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. The practice of marking the 4 cardinal points, invoking the watchtowers of the elements, and creating a purified, protected space is a direct inheritance. The elemental tools on a Wiccan altar, the wand, cup, athame, and pentacle, are the same 4 weapons from the neophyte grade, repurposed for a different mythos but serving an identical symbolic function. Even the concept of the 5-fold kiss, a ritual greeting in some traditions, echoes the symbolic reverence for the body as a microcosm of the divine, a core principle in both Kabbalah and high magic. Gardner did not simply copy, he adapted. He took the formal, hierarchical structure of the Golden Dawn and reshaped it for a duotheistic, goddess-focused religion. The intricate grades of the outer order were streamlined into a 3-degree system of priestess and priest. The invocation of planetary archangels became the invocation of the god and goddess into the bodies of their practitioners. The ultimate goal shifted from the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel to a more immanent experience of divine union within the sacred circle and the seasonal wheel of the year. This was not a dilution, but a transmutation. The Golden Dawn provided the underlying grammar, the fundamental syntax of how to construct a magical ritual and how to manipulate symbolic correspondences. Wicca then wrote its own poetry using that grammar, creating a vibrant, living tradition that empowered countless individuals to step into their own magical authority. The hidden currents of a Victorian secret society, once reserved for a select few, now flow through the forests and fields of a global spiritual movement, proving that true magic never dies, it only changes form. That sacred flame, once guarded in secret temples, now burns openly across the world. The fragmented legacy of the Golden Dawn has not been lost to time, but has instead blossomed into a global spiritual movement, accessible to anyone with an internet connection and a sincere desire to learn. The once impenetrable veil of secrecy has been lifted, largely by the descendants of the original splinter groups, organizations like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded by Israel Regardie and others in the late 20th century, and the Open Source Order of the Golden Dawn, explicitly work to make the core teachings publicly available. Their philosophy is a radical departure from the old model of sworn oaths and hidden manuscripts. They argue that true initiation comes from personal practice and understanding, not from merely guarding documents. This has led to a remarkable phenomenon: the complete knowledge lectures, the intricate rituals, and the detailed symbolic diagrams are no longer secrets. You can purchase them in beautifully bound books or download them instantly as digital files. The entire curriculum that once required a personal recommendation and a blindfolded initiation is now a published, open-source system. This democratization of knowledge has fundamentally changed who can become a magician. No longer is it the domain of a privileged few in London or Paris. Now a student in Brazil, a librarian in Japan, or an artist in Canada can embark on the same path of spiritual ascent. But with this unprecedented access comes a crucial question. How does one find a true path through the noise of so many options? The digital age has given rise to a vibrant, if sometimes chaotic, online ecosystem. Social media platforms, forums, and dedicated websites host thousands of practitioners who share experiences, debate interpretations, and form virtual temples. A seeker can watch a video demonstration of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, participate in a live-stream discussion on Kabbalistic symbolism, or receive feedback on their hand-drawn geomantic figures from an adept living on another continent. This global brain trust allows for a cross-pollination of ideas that was unimaginable in the Order's original incarnation. However, this digital agora also presents its own challenges. The same internet that connects sincere seekers also amplifies misinformation and ego-driven posturing. Without the formal structure and direct mentorship of a physical temple, how does a novice distinguish between profound insight and superficial glamour? The modern answer often lies in a hybrid approach. Many contemporary practitioners engage with the public materials online while also seeking out small, local study groups or one of the many contemporary orders that offer structured, though often virtual, training. These modern orders range from those claiming a direct, unbroken lineage from the original through one of its branches, to entirely new constructions built faithfully upon the published works. Some remain deeply traditional, insisting on the exact rituals as penned by Mathers, while others consciously adapt the language and symbolism to be more inclusive and relevant to a 21st century worldview. They might integrate insights from psychology, quantum physics, or comparative mythology, viewing the Golden Dawn system not as a fossil to be preserved, but as a living, evolving tradition. This dynamic tension between preservation and adaptation is the defining characteristic of the Golden Dawn's current chapter. The system has escaped its original bottle, and the genie will not go back in. It now lives as much in the personal practice of a solitary individual with a library card as it does in the formal proceedings of a registered order. The ultimate initiation has shifted from a ritual performed upon you to the daily discipline you choose for yourself. The real vault of the adepts is no longer a physical room, but the dedicated space a practitioner creates in their own home and, more importantly, within their own consciousness. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a brilliant, flawed, and revolutionary experiment that burned with an almost impossible intensity before shattering under its own weight. It was not merely a secret society, but a crucible where ancient wisdom was reforged into a new kind of spiritual technology, one that empowered the individual seeker in a way never seen before. Its ultimate collapse was not a failure of its ideas, but a testament to their raw power, a power that proved too volatile to be contained within a single, rigid hierarchy. The very system designed to cultivate spiritual sovereignty inevitably clashed with the human egos it sought to transcend, leading to a dramatic implosion of scandal and rebellion. Yet from those scattered embers, 1,000 new fires were lit. The legacy of the Golden Dawn is not a single organization you can join today, but the very air that modern magical practice breathes. Its revolutionary synthesis of Kabbalah, tarot, and astrology became the default language of the occult, a shared vocabulary that allows solitary witches, ceremonial magicians, and esoteric scholars to understand one another across traditions and continents. Its story is a profound lesson in the double-edged nature of esoteric knowledge. It demonstrates the incredible power of a structured path to unlock hidden potentials within the human spirit, while also serving as a stark warning about the perils of dogma, the corruption of absolute authority, and the dangers of placing any single person between the seeker and the divine. At its heart, the rise and fall of the Golden Dawn is a story about us, about the enduring, unquenchable human quest to peer behind the veil of the ordinary world and discover our own true nature. It asks a question that remains as relevant today as it was in a smoky London temple over a century ago. What are we willing to transform within ourselves to grasp a fragment of the infinite? We would love to hear your reflections on this incredible story. Who is your favorite figure in this drama? The steadfast Yeats, the visionary Mathers, or the rebellious Crowley? What was the most surprising or fascinating fact you discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into esoteric history, subscribe for more journeys into the hidden currents that have shaped our world.